It is late afternoon in the village of Mangla, South Vietnam. The congregation, gathered in honor of a funeral, processes openly under the cross from the parish to the cemetery. Although living under the veil of communism, to all outward appearances, the activity of the Catholic Church in Vietnam seems unrestrained. The evident piety, growing vocations, and open expression of devotions suggests a freedom of religion. This freedom, however, is deceptive. As Monsignor Celli, a former Vatican diplomat for Vatican-Vietnam relations, stated, "The Church in Vietnam is as free as a bird in a cage is free." The first traces of the Catholic Church in Vietnam date back to the late 16th century, when European missionaries arrived accompanying the traders. Today, of the approximately 80 million inhabitants, 5 million are Catholics, representing 8% of the total population. Throughout its 400-year history, the Catholic Church has suffered greater or lesser forms of persecution. Today, despite official declarations concerning freedom of religion, the Catholic Church is under continual surveillance as a possible threat to social order, and as such is restricted in all her activities. No official diplomatic ties exist between Vietnam and the Vatican. No foreign missionaries are allowed, and neither bishops nor priests can be ordained without government approval.
Vietnam is a country blessed with vocations to the priesthood. In every diocese there are scores of young men, sometimes as many as 100 or 200, waiting to enter the seminary. But the selection process for entering the seminary is very difficult. It's not enough that a young man speaks with his priest, speaks with his bishop, and asks to join the seminary. His application has to be vetted by the government. That means they look into his own background, into his family background, to make sure that there's nothing political there, which the government would consider an obstacle to entering the seminary.
As a result, the Church struggles to serve the growing number of faithful. In the Archdiocese of Hanoi alone, 400,000 faithful are divided between 130 parishes, of which only 30 parishes have a resident priest, which means that each priest needs to care for about 10,000 souls. For the average rural parish, the scarcity of priests means that daily and Sunday Mass is often replaced by a liturgy of the Word, simply a gospel reading, teaching, and a prayer of the Rosary. The dramatic nature of this pastoral situation is not for a lack of hopeful candidates. The number of vocations among the young is flourishing, and the desire to serve is great.
There are many vocations in Vietnam, but there are many obstacles, human obstacles. The restriction on the number of people who may join the seminary every 2 years. And even when they get to the seminary, there is a lack or shortage of professors for teaching these young men. Some priests who teach at the seminaries have to divide their time between several seminaries. It's difficult to send priests abroad for further studies, higher studies, which they need in order to be teachers at the seminaries. And it's also very difficult to find the appropriate theological books that they need for the teaching. There's a restriction on the importation of such books.
For each student in the seminary, there are between 5 and 10 candidates who wait to enter. The Church is working not to lose these vocations by supporting the study of these young men in the state universities, in anticipation that one day they may be allowed by the government to enter the seminary. Once having received permission, another obstacle facing a seminary rector is the financial cost involved in supporting a seminarian throughout his studies. Although seminarians share facilities and struggle with poor living conditions, it still costs $1 per day to support the studies of one seminarian, finances that the local church simply does not have. In order to sustain the formation of its priests, the local church looks to support and solidarity with the universal church, particularly through international Catholic charities like Aid to the Church in Need. With this desperate lack of priests, the work of religious sisters in Vietnam is increasingly vital. As government restrictions allow only few church-based social projects, these religious are either contemplative or primarily involved in pastoral fields such as religious education and spiritual care for the poor and marginalized. Here too, the Church struggles to respond to the demand of these young women hoping to enter the different communities. Often there are so many that the exact number of candidates is kept secret, so as not to cause difficulties for the congregation.
The sisters live in very cramped conditions. Also the young girls who are going on for the sisterhood. Sometimes you have 20 or 30 young novices living together in a dormitory. At this stage in their formation, normally, they should have much more room and more privacy and the quiet they need for their studies. And often in Vietnam, this is not possible.
The Daughters of Charity in Ho Chi Minh City is one such congregation working to help serve the many needs of the faithful. One of the greatest challenges is to respond to the growing request for catechetical education, particularly among the young.
For
this reason, there are many lay people and sisters who have to replace priests, above all in parishes, in areas far away from cities. For this reason, we need to educate catechists so that they can take over certain functions of priests who are not sufficiently numerous in the countryside.
The desire to learn and the need to provide the proper catechetical education is evident. Following the first Sunday Mass at 4 in the morning, hundreds of children gather to receive religious instruction before leaving for state schooling. The numbers are so overwhelming that the Church has developed a system of training catechetical teams in each diocese. Today there are more than 2,000 trained catechists. In some regions, due to the inability to be educated openly, these volunteer catechists are only able to receive instruction clandestinely. Perhaps the greatest hindrance faced by the religious and catechists alike for the development of religious education is the strict government policy towards printing of religious literature. Children often have no means of receiving even the most basic education about the faith.